It starts with one shocking moment, a slap in a crowded courtroom, a pregnant woman staggering, and two hands that should have been on her side striking instead. But that's only the opening beat. In the next hour, you'll see a marriage built on lies, a sister's desperate gamble, and a plot so carefully stitched together it nearly ruins everything. Forged records, a fake pregnancy, and a whisper network that turns friends into witnesses. You'll meet a woman fighting to keep her name, her baby, and her life, and a judge whose calm hides a secret that changes everything when he stands and says four words that make the room go silent. Who betrayed her? Who lied? And who pays when the truth finally explodes? Stay with us, because every answer will flip everything you thought you knew. If you want more jaw-dropping twists, tap like, tell us what you think in the comments, share with someone who loves true crime drama, and subscribe so you don't miss the full story. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. Camera phones were recording, despite the bailiff's warnings. Sarah Hartford sat at the defendant's table, 7 months pregnant, exhausted beyond measure. Her hands trembled as they rested on her swollen belly. Judge Theodore Mitchell presided from the bench. 62 years old, gray hair, stern face. His black robe seemed to weigh heavy on his shoulders that morning. Across the aisle sat James Hartford, Sarah's husband, 38 years old in an expensive suit. His eyes were cold as he refused to look at her. Elena Martinez, Sarah's attorney, stood at the witness stand. She was questioning Vanessa Cole, James's executive assistant. The 29-year-old woman wore a maternity dress, her hand resting protectively on a small baby bump. "Ms. Cole," Elena said, her voice sharp, "you testified yesterday that you're pregnant with Mr. Hartford's child. Is that correct?" "Yes," Vanessa answered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted nervously. "And how far along did you say you were?" 12 weeks. Elena approached the bench with a folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence medical records from Mount Sinai Hospital." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Elena turned back to Vanessa. "Ms. Cole, can you explain these records dated March 2021? Vanessa's face went pale. "I don't know what those are." "Let me read the highlighted section for the court." Elena's voice carried to every corner of the room. "Patient underwent bilateral salpingectomy, both fallopian tubes removed completely. Postoperative notes state, patient confirms desire for permanent sterilization." Gasps filled the courtroom. "Ms. Cole," Elena continued, "you cannot be pregnant. You had your tubes surgically removed 3 years ago." "Those aren't my records." Vanessa's voice rose in panic. "She forged them." James jumped to his feet. "This is a setup. Those documents are fake." Judge Mitchell slammed his gavel. "Mr. Hartford, sit down." But Elena wasn't finished. She pressed a button on her laptop. The courtroom screen lit up with text messages. "I also have these communications, Your Honor. A group chat between Mr. Hartford, Mrs. Cole, and a Dr. Raymond Pierce." She began reading aloud. "Mr. Hartford writes, 'Once custody is final, V and I disappear to Cayman.' Ms. Cole responds, 'What about the baby? Your baby with Sarah?' Mr. Hartford replies, 'Not my problem anymore. She can have it. We'll have our own.'" Elena paused for effect. And then Ms. Cole writes, "I told you I can't have kids after the surgery." Mr. Hartford responds, "I know. That's why the pregnancy claim is perfect. Can't prove it's not true until it's too late." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Vanessa stood up from the witness stand. Her face was red, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," she screamed. She lunged off the stand, rushing towards Sarah. The slap echoed through the marble courthouse like a gunshot. Sarah's head snapped to the side. Blood appeared on her split lip. "You ruined everything," Vanessa shrieked. "We had it all planned." Bailiffs rushed forward, but another figure was already moving. Rebecca Mitchell, Sarah's older sister, jumped up from the gallery. She wore designer clothes and her face was twisted with rage. Everyone thought she was coming to help Sarah. Instead, she slapped Sarah even harder. "This is your fault," Rebecca screamed. "James promised me vice president. Promised me $500,000. She hit Sarah again. "I invested everything in his fund. If he goes to prison, I'm bankrupt. I lose everything." Sarah stumbled backward, clutching her pregnant belly. More blood dripped from her lip. Judge Theodore Mitchell stood up from his bench. The gavel came down so hard it cracked the sound block. "Do not touch her!" His voice thundered through the courtroom. "Bailiffs, arrest them both, now!" The entire courtroom froze. Theodore's hands were shaking visibly. He stared at Sarah's face, the bleeding lip, the pregnant belly, the terrified eyes. He saw someone else in that moment. Someone from 33 years ago. His voice cracked. The microphone caught every word. "That's my daughter," he whispered. But in the silent courtroom, everyone heard. "God help me, that's my daughter." The screen froze on Sarah's shocked face. Then everything went black. White text appeared, 72 hours earlier. Sarah Mitchell woke up in her Manhattan apartment 3 days before that courtroom scene. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Everything looked perfect. Beautiful apartment, successful business, handsome husband. But James's side of the bed was cold. Again. Sarah got up and walked to the kitchen. She found a coffee mug in the sink with lipstick on the rim. Not her shade. She heard the front door open. James walked in wearing yesterday's clothes. "Client meeting ran late," he said without looking at her. "Crashed at the office." Sarah wanted to believe him. She didn't push. At 10 o'clock, Sarah sat in her doctor's office for a routine checkup. "Congratulations," the doctor said with a smile. "You're pregnant, about 8 weeks along." Sarah's emotions cycled through shock, then joy, then fear. She called James immediately. "Can you come home? We need to talk." "I'm slammed today." His voice was distant. "Can it wait?" "I'm pregnant." Long silence on the other end. "We'll talk tonight," he finally said. He hung up. That evening, Sarah set a romantic dinner. Candles. His favorite wine for him, sparkling water for her. His favorite meal. James arrived 3 hours late. He didn't apologize. "Did you hear what I said this morning?" Sarah asked. James poured himself whiskey. "Yeah, are you sure you wanted to keep it?" "What?" "We're building businesses. A baby now? Bad timing." "Bad timing?" Sarah's voice rose. "We're married." "Don't be emotional," James said coldly. "Think practically." It was the first crack in Sarah's denial. The next morning, Sarah went to her office. Carter and Mitchell Marketing occupied the 15th floor of a building in Midtown. She'd built the business from nothing with her partner, Ryan Cooper. Ryan knocked on her office door at 9:30. He was 41, former Marine, with a buzz cut and sharp eyes. He held financial reports. "Sarah, we have a problem, big one." He spread the papers on her desk. $180,000 missing from business accounts. Wire transfers to an offshore LLC I've never heard of. Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What?" "These have your signature." Sarah examined the documents closely. "That's not my signature. It's close, but it's not mine." "Close enough to fool a bank," Ryan said grimly. Sarah hired a handwriting expert that afternoon. The expert studied the signatures for an hour. "Professional forgery," the expert concluded. "Someone studied your signature extensively. Someone with access to lots of your signed documents." Sarah's mind raced. James handled all their household finances. He had access to everything she signed. That evening, Sarah came home early. She found James's home office door locked for the first time ever. She picked the lock with a bobby pin. Inside the desk drawer, she found a burner phone. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the messages between J and V. She's starting to ask questions. "Stick to the plan, 8 more weeks. Once the baby comes, we make our move. I can't wait to finally be together." Sarah's world collapsed. The affair had been going on for months. Her pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was part of their timeline. She checked James's work contacts on his regular phone. Only one V, Vanessa Cole, his executive assistant. Sarah needed her sister. She called Rebecca. "Can you meet me? I need you." "Of course," Rebecca said immediately. "Morton's Steakhouse. 7 tonight?" Sarah arrived at the restaurant at 7. She saw Rebecca at a corner table. As Sarah approached, she froze. At the table sat Rebecca, James, Vanessa, and a man in an expensive suit. "Sit down, Sarah," James said calmly. "We need to talk like adults." "Rebecca, what the hell is this?" Sarah stared at her sister. Rebecca wouldn't meet her eyes. The man in the suit slid papers across the table. I'm Derek Vaughn, Mr. Hartford's attorney. Divorce petition, custody filing, and criminal complaint for embezzlement. Criminal complaint? Sarah's voice cracked. I haven't done anything. You've stolen $180,000 from your own company, Derek said smoothly. We have your signatures. Bank security footage. Witnesses. James forged those signatures. We have evidence, Derek continued. We also have psychiatric evaluations. What psychiatric evaluations? I don't have a psychiatrist. Derek slid another paper across. Dr. Raymond Pierce has been treating you for 6 months. He has detailed notes from your sessions. Sarah grabbed the paper. Her hands shook as she read. Patient exhibits narcissistic personality disorder, delusional thinking, risk to herself and potential child. Recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation and supervised custody only. I've never met this doctor in my life. Sarah turned to her sister desperately. Rebecca, you're my sister. Tell them this is insane. Rebecca finally looked up. Tears ran down her face. Sarah, you need help. You've been acting erratic for months. What? The paranoia, the mood swings, accusing everyone of conspiracies. Rebecca's voice shook. I've been documenting everything for your own good. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. Documenting? You've been working with him? James offered me vice president of marketing when he takes over the company, Rebecca said. I invested everything I have in his new venture fund. If you fight this, you'll destroy my future too. Vanessa spoke for the first time. Her voice was sweet poison. He never loved you, Sarah. You were a means to an end. Your business connections, your reputation, your money. That's what he married. She placed a hand on her flat stomach. But me, he actually loves me. And I'm pregnant too. We're starting a real family. You're just in the way. Sarah stood up dizzy. The restaurant tilted. This isn't happening. Security footage also shows you've been taking prescription pills, James said. Pills not prescribed to you. Your psychiatrist is very concerned about your mental state. As Sarah tried to leave, 2 NYPD officers approached. Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud. They handcuffed her in the restaurant. Camera flashes exploded around them. Paparazzi had been tipped off. Sarah's last image before they led her away was Rebecca crying, but not stopping it. James's satisfied smile. Vanessa's hand on his arm. The holding cell at the NYPD precinct was cold concrete and metal benches. Sarah sat in her dinner dress, still in heels, 7 months pregnant and terrified. The other inmates stared at her belly. She couldn't make bail. $75,000. Her accounts had been frozen. She spent the night on a metal bench, too afraid to close her eyes. The next morning, Ryan Cooper arrived. He'd used his house as collateral to bail her out. Thank you, Sarah whispered as they signed the papers. Don't thank me yet, Ryan said grimly. You have to do a perp walk. There are reporters everywhere. They led Shwara outside. The flash of cameras was blinding. Reporters shouted questions. Did you steal from your own company? Is it true you're mentally unstable? What about the baby? Sarah kept her head down, hand protectively over her belly. The headlines appeared within an hour. Sarah saw them on her phone in Ryan's car. Pregnant CEO arrested for fraud. Marketing executive embezzled $180,000 while planning baby. Sarah Mitchell, from Forbes 30 under 30 to facing 10 years. Ryan drove her to an attorney's office in Tribeca. Elena Martinez was 45 with sharp eyes and a Bronx accent. She wore a tailored suit and no-nonsense expression. I'm going to be straight with you, Sarah, Elena said after reviewing the case for an hour. This is bad. I didn't do any of this. I believe you, but belief doesn't win in court. Evidence does. And right now, they have all the evidence. How is that possible? Elena spread papers across her desk. They've been planning this for at least 8 months, probably longer. Every piece of evidence points to you. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation before the custody hearing. Sarah was forced to meet with a court-appointed psychologist the next day. The psychologist was a stern woman in her 50s. She took notes constantly. Your regular psychiatrist, Dr. Pierce, noted you expressed suicidal ideation, the psychologist said. Can you expand on that? I've never met Dr. Pierce in my life. The psychologist made a note. Patient denies previous treatment. Possible dissociative episode. Sarah realized the trap. Denial proved their point. Anything she said could be twisted. That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah couldn't sleep. She researched everything about James Hartford. At 2 in the morning, she found something. James had been married before, briefly at age 26, to a woman named Michelle Torres. The marriage lasted only 8 months. Sarah dug deeper. Found a court filing from 15 years ago. Michelle Torres had filed for protection from financial abuse. The case was dismissed. Sarah called Elena at 2:30 in the morning. I found his first wife, Sarah said. He did this before. Elena was instantly alert. Send me everything you have. The next morning, Elena flew to Portland, Oregon. She met Michelle Torres at a coffee shop downtown. Michelle was 42 now. She lived quietly, worked as a teacher. When Elena showed her James's photo from the news, Michelle went pale. When I saw his face, I almost threw up, Michelle said quietly. He did the exact same thing to me, almost word for word. Over coffee, Michelle told her story. She'd married James at 24. He was charming, successful, from a wealthy family. Within months, he'd isolated her from friends. He forged documents to access her inheritance from her grandmother, $50,000. He had her declared mentally incompetent. She escaped with nothing. It took me 10 years to rebuild my life, Michelle said. I changed my name, moved across the country. I thought I was safe. Will you testify? Elena asked. Michelle was quiet for a long moment. The media will destroy my privacy, dig into my past, expose everything I've tried to bury. I know. But if I can save her, Michelle said finally, it's worth it. Elena called Sarah that night. We have a witness, someone who can prove James's pattern of behavior. For the first time in days, Sarah felt hope. Meanwhile, Ryan was working the financial angle. He'd spent 3 days tracing the missing $180,000. He found the offshore account. It was indeed in Sarah's name. But he found something else. James had been siphoning money for 14 months, not just from Sarah's business, from his hedge fund clients too. Total missing, over $2 million. Ryan called Elena immediately. This isn't just divorce fraud. This is securities fraud. Federal prosecutors might get involved. Can you prove it? Elena asked. I'm working on it. The preliminary hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Sarah, Elena, and Ryan prepared their strategy. They would present Michelle's testimony about James's pattern. They would show Ryan's financial analysis. They would prove the psychiatric records were fabricated. They thought they had a chance. Tuesday morning arrived. Sarah dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit. She was nearly 8 months pregnant now. Moving was difficult. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators. James sat at the plaintiff's table with Derek Vaughn and 2 other attorneys. He looked confident. Rebecca sat in the gallery. She wouldn't look at Sarah. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Hendricks. This is a preliminary hearing, Judge Hendricks said. I'll hear evidence from both sides and make temporary rulings on custody and asset distribution. Derek Vaughn stood. Your Honor, will present clear evidence that Mrs. Hartford embezzled from her company, shows signs of severe mental illness, and poses a danger to her unborn child. He called Rebecca to the stand first. Rebecca was sworn in. She wore a simple dress and minimal makeup, playing the concerned sister role perfectly. Ms. Mitchell, how long have you known the defendant? She's my sister. I've known her my whole life. And in the past year, have you noticed changes in her behavior? Rebecca nodded slowly. Yes, she became increasingly paranoid, accused people of plotting against her. Our mother died of mental illnesses. I was worried Sarah had inherited it. It was a lie. Their mother had died of cancer. Did she ever express thoughts of self-harm? Yes. In October, she told me she'd rather die than lose everything. Another lie. Sarah and Rebecca hadn't even spoken in October. Did you document these concerns? Yes, I kept notes, text messages. I was scared for her. Derek entered Rebecca's documentation into evidence. Sarah watched in horror as her sister systematically destroyed her. Elena cross-examined. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true that Mr. Hartford offered you a position as vice president if he takes over your sister's company? He mentioned it, yes. And isn't it true you invested your life savings in his venture fund? Rebecca hesitated. I made an investment, yes. So if your sister fights this, you lose your money? I'm here because I'm concerned about my sister's mental health, Rebecca said firmly. The judge seemed to believe her. Next, Derek called Vanessa to the stand. Vanessa wore a maternity dress. She placed her hand on her stomach protectively. Ms. Cole, can you describe your relationship with Mrs. Hartford? I was her husband's assistant. She verbally abused me daily, called me terrible names, threw things at me, threatened to destroy me. And when did you discover you were pregnant? 2 months ago. When Sarah found out, she became violent. Sarah half stood. That's a lie! Judge Hendricks slammed her gavel. Mrs. Hartford, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt. Elena pulled Sarah back down. Don't play into their hands, she whispered. After 2 hours of testimony, Judge Hendricks called a recess. Elena met with Sarah and Ryan in the hallway. We need Michelle's testimony, Elena said. It's our only chance. When does she arrive? Sarah asked. Tomorrow morning. That night, Sarah lay awake in her apartment. The baby kicked hard. She placed her hand on her belly. I'm trying, baby girl, she whispered. I'm trying so hard. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Give up. You can't win. This is only going to get worse. Sarah deleted it, but sleep didn't come. Wednesday morning, Sarah arrived at court with Elena. Michelle Torres was scheduled to testify at 10 o'clock. Ryan had worked all night on financial documents. His eyes were bloodshot, but he had a thick folder of evidence. I traced every dollar, Ryan said. James has been stealing from his hedge fund clients for over a year. This is way bigger than your divorce. Can we use it? Sarah asked. I'm presenting it to federal prosecutors this afternoon, Ryan said. If they take the case, it changes everything. Michelle Torres arrived at 9:30. She looked nervous but determined. She wore a simple gray suit and no jewelry. Are you ready? Elena asked her. No, Michelle said honestly, but I am doing it anyway. At 10 o'clock, Judge Hendricks called the court to order. Defense may call their first witness, the judge said. Defense calls Michelle Torres, Elena announced. Michelle took the stand and was sworn in. Elena began gently. Miss Torres, can you tell the court how you know James Hartford? I was married to him 15 years ago. A murmur went through the courtroom. James's face tightened, but he didn't react. And how long were you married to? 8 months. Can you describe that marriage? Michelle took a breath. At first, it was wonderful. He was charming, successful. But after the wedding, things changed. He isolated me from my friends, took control of my finances. When my grandmother died and left me $50,000, he forged my signature to access the money. Did you report this? I tried, but he had convinced everyone I was mentally unstable. He'd been documenting supposed erratic behavior. When I tried to get my money back, his lawyers painted me as delusional. Elena presented documents from the old case. Your Honor, these filings show a pattern identical to what Mr. Hartford is doing to my client. Sarah watched the judge's face. She seemed to be listening. But then Derek Vaughan stood for cross-examination. Ms. Torres, you have a restraining order against you, don't you? Michelle froze. That was from an ex-boyfriend years later. It has nothing to do with... Yes or no, Ms. Torres? Yes. And that restraining order was granted because you made false accusations of assault? They weren't false. The court found them false. Yes or no? Michelle's voice was barely audible. The court ruled against me. Derek pulled out medical records. Sarah had no idea how he'd obtained them. These are your psychiatric records, Ms. Torres. They show treatment for depression, anxiety medication, and 2 suicide attempts in your 20s. Is that correct? I was going through a difficult time. So you're asking this court to believe your testimony about events from 15 years ago, when you have a documented history of false accusations and mental instability? Elena objected. Your Honor, this is character assassination. I'm establishing credibility, Derek said smoothly. Judge Hendricks sustained some objections, overruled others. The damage was done. When Michelle left the stand, she was crying. She mouthed to Sarah, I'm sorry. Sarah felt her hope crumble. Derek wasn't finished. He presented new evidence. Your Honor, we have security footage from Mrs. Hartford's office building. The courtroom screen lit up with grainy footage. It showed a woman entering the building at 2:47 in the morning. accessing the company's safe, taking cash. The woman looked like Sarah. This footage is from multiple dates over the past 6 months, Derek said. It clearly shows Mrs. Hartford embezzling from her own company. Elena stood. Your Honor, we'll need to have this footage authenticated. It could be doctored. It's from the building's own security system, Derek said. Objection overruled, Judge Hendricks said. The footage appears legitimate. Elena leaned to Sarah. That has to be fake, but proving it will take weeks. We don't have weeks. The hearing ended at 4 o'clock. Judge Hendricks would issue preliminary rulings in the morning. Sarah, Elena, and Ryan sat in Elena's office that evening. I don't understand, Sarah said. How did they fake security footage? Deep fakes, Ryan said. It's expensive, but possible. They mapped your face onto someone else. With enough money and planning, they can fake almost anything. Can we prove it? Not in time for tomorrow's ruling. Elena rubbed her temples. We need a miracle. Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Hello? Mrs. Hartford, this is Mount Sinai Hospital. Your husband listed us as your emergency contact. We need you to come in immediately. What? Why? Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to be monitored. Sarah hung up. They're trying to get me admitted, to make me look unstable. Don't go, Elena said. But an hour later, Sarah doubled over in pain, sharp cramping in her abdomen. Ryan called 911. The ambulance took Sarah to Mount Sinai. The ER doctor, who was a kind woman in her 40s. You're having preterm contractions, the doctor said seriously. You're only 29 weeks. This is dangerous. Is the baby okay? For now, but the stress is putting both of you at critical risk. I'm admitting you, complete bed rest, minimum 1 week. I have a court hearing tomorrow. If you don't rest, you could lose this baby, or worse. They admitted Sarah to the maternity ward. She lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. The baby's heartbeat beeped steadily. Elena called at 9 that night. How are you? I'm supposed to stay here a week. Sarah, the judge issued preliminary rulings without you there. And Elena's voice was heavy. Emergency temporary custody goes to James. You get supervised visitation only. You have to undergo psychiatric evaluation. The company is frozen pending further investigation. Sarah felt like she'd been punched. No. I'm sorry, but I didn't do anything. How can they give custody to him? Rebecca's testimony was very convincing. Combined with the security footage and Dr. Pierce's evaluation, the judge feels it's in the baby's best interest. After Elena hung up, Sarah lay in the dark hospital room. She placed both hands on her belly. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Around midnight, the baby's heartbeat dropped suddenly. Alarm sounded. Nurses rushed in. What's happening? Sarah cried. The baby's in distress. We need to monitor closely. They increased her IV medications, added more monitors. The doctor came in. If this continues, we may need to do an emergency C-section, the doctor said. At 29 weeks, the baby would need extensive NICU care. Sarah lay perfectly still, trying to calm her breathing, trying to calm her heart rate, trying to keep her baby safe. But all she could think was, James is winning. He's destroying me, and I can't stop it. The night felt endless. By morning, the baby's heartbeat had stabilized. Sarah was exhausted, but the danger had passed for now. Ryan came to visit at 8 in the morning. He looked like he hadn't slept either. I went to the federal prosecutors yesterday, Ryan said. Showed them everything about James's hedge fund fraud. And? They're interested, very interested, but they said it would take months to build a case. I don't have months. I know. Ryan sat down heavily. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Did you take any of that money, even by accident? Even if James convinced you it was okay? Sarah stared at him. You don't believe me either. I want to, but the evidence, get out. Sarah, I said get out. Ryan left. Sarah was alone. The nurse came in with lunch. Sarah couldn't eat. The food sat untouched. Her phone buzzed with news alerts. The media was having a field day. Pregnant CEO too unstable for custody hearing. Judge rules against Sarah Mitchell in fraud case. Sister's testimony exposes marketing executive's mental illness. Every person in America was reading about her, judging her, believing she was a criminal, believing she was crazy. And the worst part was, she was starting to wonder if they were right. Maybe she was crazy. Maybe she'd imagined the happy marriage. Maybe she'd missed all the signs because she was desperate to believe in something. Maybe she deserved this. That afternoon, a new doctor came in, a psychiatrist. "I'm Dr. Lawrence," he said. "The court ordered an evaluation." "Another one?" "I'm independent from Dr. Pierce. I'll conduct my own assessment." For 2 hours, Dr. Lawrence asked questions about her childhood, her relationship with James, her business, her mental state. Sarah answered honestly. She had nothing left to hide. At the end, Dr. Lawrence closed his notebook. "Mrs. Hartford, I don't think you're mentally ill." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Really?" "I think you're being systematically abused. This is a classic pattern of narcissistic manipulation, but proving that in court is extremely difficult." "What do I do?" "You keep fighting. You document everything. You don't give up." After he left, Sarah lay back on the hospital bed. The baby kicked. "Did you hear that, baby girl?" Sarah whispered. "Someone believes us." It was a tiny spark of hope, but it was something. Sarah spent 5 days in the hospital. The doctors finally cleared her to go home on the condition that she take it easy and avoid stress. Avoid stress, as if that were possible. Elena picked her up from the hospital. They drove to Sarah's apartment in silence. "The final custody hearing is in 4 days, Elena said. "Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be there." "Sarah, I need to be honest with you. The odds aren't good." "I know, but I'm not giving up. Are you?" Sarah looked out the window at the city passing by. "No, I'm not giving up." Back at her apartment, Sarah found eviction notices on her door. James had stopped paying the rent. Of course he had. She had 5 days to vacate. Sarah called Ryan. After their argument at the hospital, she wasn't sure he'd answer. He picked up on the third ring. "Sarah, I'm sorry about what I said." "I know. I spent the last few days digging deeper. I found something." "What?" "James has been using shell companies, multiple layers. He created an entire fake financial network." Ryan explained, there was a shell company that paid Dr. Pierce $5,000 monthly. The same company paid Vanessa $5,000 in consulting fees. "It's all connected," Ryan said. "James created a network specifically to frame you." "Can we prove it in court?" "I'm working on it." "But Sarah, there's just something else." "What?" "I hacked Vanessa's cloud backup. I know it's legally gray, but I found messages between her, James, and Dr. Pierce." "What kind of messages?" "A group chat called Project Cleanup. They coordinated everything, the psychiatric report, Rebecca's testimony, the timeline, all of it." Sarah felt cold. "Send them to Elena immediately." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, searching for information about her own mother. Her mother, Margaret Carson, had died when Sarah was 19. Ovarian cancer. It happened fast. 3 months from diagnosis to death. Her mother never talked about Sarah's father. The birth certificate said father unknown. Growing up, Sarah had wondered, but her mother would get sad when asked, so Sarah stopped asking. Now, alone in the dark apartment, Sarah searched online for her mother's past. She found an old alumni magazine from Columbia University, class of 1992. There was a photo of her mother at graduation, standing with a group of friends. One of them was a young man, handsome, confident. The caption read, "Margaret Carson with classmate Theodore Mitchell, who will be attending Columbia Law School." Theodore Mitchell. Sarah Googled the name, found dozens of results. Judge Theodore Mitchell, New York Circuit Court, 30 years on the bench. She found a photo, the same man from her mother's graduation photo. Just older now. Sarah's heart pounded. Could it be? She searched more. Found her mother's old diary in a box of stored belongings. She'd never read it before. It felt like invading privacy. But now she opened it to a random page, dated 1991. TM said he can't choose us over his career. He's engaged to a federal judge's daughter. I understand. His ambition was always bigger than love. I won't force him to be a father. Sarah deserves better than someone who doesn't want to be there. Sarah read the entry 3 times. T.M. Theodore Mitchell, her father, a sitting judge. She should feel something, anger, betrayal, loss. Instead, she felt numb. It didn't matter anyway. She had bigger problems. Sarah closed the diary and went to bed. The next morning, Tuesday, Elena called. I have news. Good or bad? Potentially good. Judge Hendricks had a family emergency. Her mother died. She's taking leave. So what happens to our case? It's being reassigned to Judge Theodore Mitchell, Senior Circuit Court Judge. Sarah's blood went cold. Theodore Mitchell? You know him. No, I mean, I've heard the name. His reputation is good, right? Impeccable, 30 years on the bench, known for being fair but tough. This could actually work in our favor. Sarah said nothing. Sarah, are you there? Yeah, I'm here. After they hung up, Sarah sat staring at the wall. Her father, her biological father who had never met her, who had abandoned her mother. He would be the judge deciding her fate. The universe had a sick sense of humor. Tuesday evening, Elena called an emergency meeting at her office. Sarah and Ryan sat across from her desk. Elena looked like she'd been awake for 48 hours straight. I've been analyzing the messages Ryan found. This is our smoking gun. She displayed them on her laptop screen. James to Vanessa, dated 4 months ago. Psych report needs to include suicidal ideation. Make sure Pierce adds that. Dr. Pierce to James, already drafted. Rebecca will testify to the October incident. Vanessa to James, what October incident? Nothing happened in October. James will say, there is now. Rebecca's on board. More messages, planning every detail, coordinating testimony, creating false evidence. This proves conspiracy, Elena said. But here's the problem. Ryan obtained these illegally. I can try to get them admitted, but the judge might throw them out. What if someone anonymously tips the FBI, Ryan suggested. Already done, Elena said, but federal investigations take time. We need these for Wednesday. Sarah studied the messages. What about the pregnancy lie? Can we use that? We need proof Vanessa isn't actually pregnant, Elena said. Medical proof. Ryan, can you get her medical records? Sarah asked. I've been trying. Hospital systems are tougher to hack than personal cloud storage. We need it by tomorrow, Elena said. That's our best shot. They worked through the night, Ryan on his laptop trying to access hospital databases, Elena drafting legal arguments, Sarah making timeline charts, connecting all the pieces. At 2 in the morning, Ryan suddenly sat up straight. I'm in. Mount Sinai? Elena asked. Yeah, I have Vanessa's records. He pulled up the files, medical history, prescriptions, procedures, there. March 2021. Bilateral salpingectomy, Ryan read. Both fallopian tubes completely removed. Post-operative notes say, patient confirms desire for permanent sterilization. She can't be pregnant, Sarah said. It's medically impossible. This is it, Elena said. This is how we destroy her credibility. They printed the records, made copies, prepared exhibits. The final custody hearing was in 7 hours. Sarah went home to shower and change. She stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear, to fight for her life. She chose a simple navy dress, professional, not too expensive. She wanted to look like a struggling mother, not a wealthy executive. At 8:30 Wednesday morning, Sarah arrived at the courthouse. Reporters were everywhere. Cameras flashing, questions shouted. Sarah kept her head down and walked inside with Elena. The courtroom was the same one she'd been in before, but this time a different judge sat at the bench. Theodore Mitchell. He was 62 years old. Gray hair, sharp eyes. He wore black robes and an expression of complete neutrality. When Sarah entered, he glanced at her briefly. No recognition in his eyes. He didn't know who she was. Sarah sat at the defendant's table. Her hands were shaking. James arrived with his lawyers. Vanessa sat in the front row of the gallery. Rebecca sat on the opposite side. At 9 o'clock exactly, Judge Mitchell called the court to order. This is the final hearing in Hartford versus Hartford, he said. His voice was deep and commanding. I've reviewed the preliminary rulings by Judge Hendricks. I've read all the filings. Let's proceed. Derek Vaughn stood. Your Honor will present overwhelming evidence that Mrs. Hartford is mentally unstable and a danger to herself and her unborn child. Judge Mitchell nodded. Defense? Elena stood. Your Honor will prove this is an elaborate conspiracy to defraud my client of her business, her reputation, and her child. We have documentation showing coordination between Mr. Hartford, his assistant, Vanessa Cole, and a psychiatrist named Raymond Pierce. Judge Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. We have evidence, Your Honor. Proceed. The morning was brutal. Derek called witnesses. Dr. Pierce testified about Sarah's supposed mental illness. His testimony was smooth, practiced. He had notes from sessions that never happened. Elena cross-examined. And then Dr. Pierce, can you provide documentation that Mrs. Hartford actually attended these sessions? I keep confidential notes, but no sign-in sheets, no appointment confirmations, no billing records showing she paid for these visits. She paid way. How convenient. Judge Mitchell wrote notes constantly. His face gave nothing away. At 11 o'clock, they broke for lunch. Sarah couldn't eat. She sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Elena and Ryan. How do you think it's going? Sarah asked. Hard to say, Elena admitted. Judge Mitchell is impossible to read. This afternoon, I'm calling Vanessa to the stand, Elena continued. That's when we reveal the pregnancy lie. What if they have a counter? Ryan asked. Then we're done, Elena said bluntly. But I don't think they do. They weren't expecting us to find her medical records. At 1 o'clock, court resumed. Elena stood. Defense calls Vanessa Cole. Vanessa walked to the witness stand. She wore a maternity dress. Her hand rested on her small belly. Judge Mitchell said, Please state your name for the record. Vanessa Marie Cole. You may proceed, Counselor, the judge said to Elena. Elena approached the witness stand. She held a folder. Ms. Cole, you previously testified that you're pregnant with Mr. Hartford's child. Is that correct? Yes. How far along are you? 12 weeks now. Have you been to a doctor? Yes, Dr. Sarah Winters at Manhattan Women's Health. And Dr. Winters confirmed the pregnancy? Yes. Elena nodded slowly. Ms. Cole, I have medical records here from Mount Sinai Hospital, dated March 2021. Can you tell me what these documents describe? Vanessa's face went pale. I don't know what those are. Let me read the highlighted section for the court. Elena's voice carried clearly. Patient underwent bilateral salpingectomy, both fallopian tubes removed completely. Post-operative notes state, patient confirms desire for permanent sterilization. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Ms. Cole, Elena continued, you had your tubes surgically removed 3 years ago. You cannot be pregnant. It is medically impossible. Vanessa looked at James, then at Derek, then back at Elena. Those aren't my records, she said. But her voice shook. Your name, date of birth, social security number, and signature are all on the consent forms, Elena said. Judge Mitchell leaned forward. Miss Cole, are you claiming these records are falsified? I don't know, maybe. She could have forged them. Elena projected the documents on the courtroom screen. Your Honor, these are certified medical records obtained directly from Mount Sinai Hospital. There's no forgery. Derek Vaughn jumped up. Your Honor, we need time to verify these documents. They appear authentic to me, Judge Mitchell said coldly. Ms. Cole, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you or are you not pregnant? Vanessa started crying. I was just trying to help James. Sarah is dangerous. She threatened me. I was scared. Answer the question, the judge said. Are you pregnant? No, Vanessa whispered. I'm not pregnant. The courtroom exploded. Judge Mitchell slammed his gavel. Order! I will have order! But the chaos was just beginning. Elena wasn't finished. While the courtroom was still reeling from Vanessa's admission, she struck again. Your Honor, I have additional evidence. Elena approached the bench with printouts. These are messages from a group chat between Mr. Hartford, Ms. Cole, and Dr. Raymond Pierce, a group they called Project Cleanup. Derek Vaughn objected. Your Honor, we haven't seen this evidence. It was obtained last night, Elena said. I provided copies to opposing counsel this morning. Judge Mitchell took the documents. He read them in silence. His expression darkened with each page. "Mr. Vaughn," the judge said slowly, "did you know about this group chat?" "No, Your Honor. I had no knowledge of any coordination between my client and these witnesses." "That's convenient." Judge Mitchell looked at James. "Mr. Hartford, stand up." James stood. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Did you create a group chat specifically to coordinate false testimony against your wife?" "Your Honor, those messages are taken out of context." "That's not what I asked." "Did you create this group?" James's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. James said nothing. Judge Mitchell turned to Dr. Pierce, who sat in the gallery. "Bailiff, I want Dr. Pierce detained. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of perjury and conspiracy." Two bailiffs approached Pierce. He stood up, face red. "This is outrageous. I'm a licensed psychiatrist." "Not for long," Judge Mitchell said. "I'm also notifying the medical board." He turned back to Vanessa on the stand. "Ms. Cole, you admitted under oath that you lied about being pregnant. That's perjury, a felony. Do you understand?" Vanessa was sobbing now. "I didn't want to do it. James said it would be easy. He said Sarah would just give up." "That's enough," James shouted, standing up. "She doesn't know what she's saying." Judge Mitchell's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Mr. Hartford, sit down right now or you'll join Dr. Pierce in custody." But Vanessa was spiraling. She pointed at Sarah. "This is all your fault. We had everything planned. James and I were going to be together. We were going to start over in the Cayman Islands. You were supposed to just disappear." She lunged off the witness stand, still pointing at Sarah. "You ruined everything." The bailiffs moved toward her, but she was fast. She reached Sarah before they could stop her. The slap echoed through the courtroom. Sarah's head snapped to the side. She felt the sting, tasted blood. "You destroyed my life," Vanessa shrieked. The bailiffs grabbed her arms, but another figure was already moving. Rebecca Mitchell jumped up from the gallery. Her face was twisted with rage. Everyone thought she was coming to help Sarah. Instead, she slapped Sarah even harder. "This is your fault," Rebecca screamed. "James promised me vice president, promised me $500,000. She hit Sarah again. "I invested everything in his fund. If he goes to prison, I'm bankrupt. I lose everything because of you." Sarah stumbled backward, clutching her pregnant belly. Blood dripped from her split lip. Judge Theodore Mitchell stood up from his bench. The movement was so sudden, so powerful that everyone froze. He slammed the gavel down. The sound block cracked under the force. "Do not touch her!" His voice thundered through the courtroom. Every word vibrated with barely controlled rage. "Bailiffs, arrest them both, now!" The entire courtroom was silent. Everyone stared at the judge. Theodore's hands shook visibly. He stared at Sarah's face, the bleeding lip, the pregnant belly, the terrified eyes. In that moment, he saw Margaret, his Margaret, the woman he'd abandoned 33 years ago. He saw the same eyes, the same face, the same desperate fear. His voice cracked. The microphone caught every word. "That's my daughter," he whispered. But in the silent courtroom, it sounded like a shout. "God help me, that's my daughter." No one moved. No one breathed. Sarah stared up at him, blood on her face, one hand on her belly. "What?" she whispered. Theodore removed his robe with shaking hands. The black cloth fell to the floor behind the bench. He stepped down, breaking every rule of judicial conduct. "Your mother was Margaret Carson," he said. His voice was raw. "We met in college, Columbia. Class of '92. Sarah felt dizzy. The courtroom tilted. "She got pregnant," Theodore continued. "I was engaged to someone else, someone politically connected, a federal judge's daughter. I told Margaret I couldn't leave my fiancé. I chose my career." His voice broke. "I chose wrong." Sarah's tears came then. "You left her? You left us?" "Every day for 33 years I've regretted it. When she died, I read the obituary. I wanted to reach out. But what right did I have? Where were you when she got cancer?" Sarah's voice rose. "Where were you when she worked 3 jobs to put me through school? Where were you when I buried her alone?" "I know," Theodore said. "I have no excuse. The courtroom was chaos now, reporters shouting, cameras flashing despite bailiff orders, Vanessa and Rebecca in handcuffs, James trying to flee toward the door. "Bailiff!" Theodore's voice cut through the noise. "Stop, Mr. Hartford!" The bailiffs blocked the courtroom doors. James was trapped. Theodore looked at Sarah one more time. "I won't abandon you again. Not while I'm breathing." Then he turned to the court clerk. "File my immediate recusal from this case. Judge Patterson will take over and issue rulings, but before I step down." He looked at James. "Mr. Hartford, federal prosecutors are being notified. What you've done isn't just civil fraud. It's criminal conspiracy, wire fraud, securities fraud. You're going to prison." He looked at Rebecca. "Ms. Mitchell, you'll be charged with perjury, conspiracy, and assault." Then at Vanessa. "Ms. Cole, you'll be charged with perjury, conspiracy, and assault on a pregnant woman." Finally, he looked at Derek Vaughn. "Counselor, I strongly suggest you distance yourself from these clients. Immediately." Theodore picked up his robe from the floor. He folded it carefully. Then he walked out of the courtroom. He didn't look back. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, hands still on her bleeding lip. Elena sat beside her, arm around her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Elena whispered. "No," Sarah said honestly, "but we won." The bailiffs led Vanessa and Rebecca out in handcuffs. They were both crying. Rebecca looked back at Sarah one more time. "I'm sorry," Rebecca mouthed. Sarah said nothing. James was surrounded by bailiffs. Derek Vaughn was arguing urgently with them, trying to prevent an immediate arrest. But the evidence was overwhelming. Ryan came down from the gallery. He sat on Sarah's other side. "That was the most insane thing I've ever seen in a courtroom." "Is it over?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," Elena said, "but we're close." Judge Patterson took over the next day. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with 20 years on the bench. She spent 3 hours reviewing all the evidence, the messages, the medical records, the forged signatures, the conspiracy. Then she issued her rulings. Full custody to Sarah Mitchell Hartford. All business assets returned to plaintiff. Restraining orders issued against James Hartford, Vanessa Cole, and Rebecca Mitchell. I'm referring all criminal matters to the district attorney immediately. Sarah sat in the courtroom and heard the words, but they didn't feel real. Elena hugged her. "You won everything." "Did I?" But touched her face where her sister had hit her. "My face is all over the news. Secret judge's daughter. Courtroom slap goes viral. I got 47 client cancellation emails this morning." "The truth came out," Elena said. "That's what matters." "The truth is I'm broke, traumatized, and about to be a single mother," Sarah said. "Legally I won, but I still lost everything." That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment. The eviction notice was still on her door. She had 2 days to move out. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" "Sarah, it's Theodore. Mitchell. I don't know what to call myself." Sarah said nothing. "I'm sorry," Theodore said. "For everything, for today, for 33 years ago, for all of it." "I'm not ready to talk to you," Sarah said. "I understand, but can I ask you something?" "What?" "The baby, is she okay after today?" Sarah placed her hand on her belly. The baby kicked. "She's okay." "I'm glad. I'm so glad." Silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," Theodore said, "but I'd like to help, financially, if you need anything." "I don't want your money." "Okay, but Sarah?" "What?" "I'm not leaving again. Whether you want me in your life or not, I'm going to be around. I'm going to make sure you and that baby are safe." Sarah hung up without answering. She looked around her empty apartment, at the boxes she'd need to pack, at the life she'd need to rebuild from nothing. The baby kicked again. "It's just us now, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "But we're going to be okay, I promise." She wasn't sure if she believed it, but she had to try. 1 week after the courtroom explosion, Sarah sat in a visiting room at Rikers Island. The room smelled like bleach and despair. Metal chairs bolted to the floor. Thick glass partition. Rebecca entered on the other side. She wore an orange jumpsuit, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked 10 years older. They sat across from each other. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Sarah said, "Why?" Rebecca stared at her hands. You really want to know? Yes. A long pause. Mom always loved you more, Rebecca said quietly. That's not true. It is true. Rebecca looked up. You were her daughter. I was just there. You got into Yale. I got into state school. Your business thrived. Mine failed. Everything you touched turned to gold. Everything I touched turned to dust. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. So you destroyed me? James offered me a chance to finally win. Rebecca's voice cracked. For once in my life, someone chose me first. He said you'd be fine. You're always fine. You always land on your feet. I almost lost my baby, Rebecca. I almost lost my mind. Rebecca broke down completely, shoulders shaking with sobs. I know, and I can't take it back. She looked up through tears. I'll spend years in prison knowing I destroyed the only person who ever really loved me. Sarah stood up. You're right about one thing. I did love you. Past tense. She walked toward the door. Sarah, wait, please. Will you ever forgive me? Sarah stopped at the door, didn't turn around. I don't know, ask me in 10 years. She left without looking back. The next day, Sarah met Theodore at a coffee shop in Central Park. Neutral territory. Public place. He was already there when she arrived. He stood up when he saw her. Thank you for coming, he said. They sat down. Awkward silence. I don't expect forgiveness, Theodore said. Good, because I'm not ready to give it. But you stood up for me when it mattered, even though it destroyed your career. I didn't destroy it. Theodore stirred his coffee. I finally used it right. I've spent 30 years on the bench pretending I was a good man. The other day was the first time I actually was one. Sarah placed her hand on her belly. The baby kicked. I'm naming her Grace, after my grandmother, Mom's mother. Theodore's eyes filled with tears. That's beautiful. Your grandmother would be honored. Can I be part of her life? He asked. Part of your life? Sarah studied him. This stranger who shared her DNA. I don't know you. You're not Dad. You're just Theodore. I understand. But Grace deserves a grandfather. Theodore looked up hopefully. So here's the deal, Sarah continued. You show up consistently every week. One missed visit without a good reason, and you're done. Forever. I'll be there, Theodore said quickly. Every single week, I promise. Don't make promises. Just show up. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching people walk by in the park, joggers, dog walkers, families with strollers. What are you going to do now? Theodore asked. With the business? Rebuild from scratch. Most of my clients left. My reputation is damaged. I'm starting over. I can help, not financially if you don't want, but I have connections, people who might give you a chance. Sarah considered. Pride wanted her to refuse, but practicality won. Okay, thank you. And where will you live? I heard about the eviction. I found a small place in Brooklyn, Park Slope, above a bookstore. It's not much, but it's what I can afford. Theodore nodded. If you need anything, anything at all, I know where to find you. They parted at the park entrance. Theodore started to offer a hug, then thought better of it. He settled for a gentle touch on Sarah's shoulder. See you next week, he said. We'll see, Sarah replied, but as she walked away, she felt something. Not forgiveness, not trust, but maybe the beginning of possibility. The media frenzy continued for weeks. Sarah became a viral sensation. Videos of the slap played millions of times. Think pieces were written about financial abuse, gaslighting, narcissistic manipulation. Some people supported her. Many didn't. Comment sections were brutal. She must have done something to deserve it. Why didn't she see the signs? Probably lying about being innocent. Sarah stopped reading after the first few days. She moved into her new apartment in Brooklyn. One bedroom, tiny kitchen. But it was hers, and it was safe. Ryan helped her move. They'd reconciled after everything came out. He'd apologized dozens of times for doubting her. I should have believed you from the start, he said as they carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs. You came around when it mattered, Sarah said. That's what counts. They rebuilt Carter and Mitchell marketing slowly. 3 clients at first, then 5. then 8. Sarah worked from home, her laptop on a desk by the window. Her belly grew. She could barely reach the keyboard anymore. Elena called regularly with updates on the criminal cases. James pled guilty, Elena said one afternoon. 8 years federal prison. Could have been more, but he cooperated with prosecutors about the hedge fund fraud. And Vanessa? 3 years for perjury and conspiracy. She turned on James completely when she realized he'd been using her. Rebecca? 18 months. With good behavior, probably 14 months. She expressed genuine remorse. The judge took that into account. Sarah felt nothing hearing the news, just emptiness. And Dr. Pierce, she asked? Lost his license permanently, facing criminal charges. He'll do time. Good. After they hung up, Sarah sat looking out the window. Snow was falling gently. Early December in New York. Her due date was Christmas Day. True to his word, Theodore came every week. Thursday afternoons at 3 o'clock. He brought coffee for Sarah, decaf since she was pregnant. They would talk for an hour, small talk at first, then deeper conversations. He told her about her mother, their college romance, how they'd met in a Shakespeare class, how Margaret had been brilliant, funny, kind. Why did you choose your career over her? Sarah asked one day. Theodore was quiet for a long moment. Because I was a coward. I told myself it was about ambition, about my future. But really, I was just scared. Scared of what my family would think. Scared of starting over with nothing. Do you regret it? Every single day. Good, Sarah said. You should. But she said it without anger, just statement of fact. Theodore also helped professionally. He'd retired from the bench after the scandal, but he knew everyone in New York legal circles. He made calls, vouched for Sarah. Slowly, clients returned. Not all of them, but enough. Christmas Eve arrived. Sarah was enormous now, waddling more than walking, ready for this pregnancy to be over. She was wrapping presents for Theodore when her water broke. The contractions started 20 minutes later. Sarah called Elena first. It's happening. I'm on my way. Then Ryan. Baby time. Meet me at Mount Sinai. Finally, Theodore. She's coming. Silence on the other end. Then, I'll be right there. The labor was long. 18 hours. Sarah had never experienced pain like this. She cursed James, cursed Rebecca, cursed everyone who'd put her through hell. But at 8:42 on Christmas morning, Grace Margaret Mitchell was born. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair, eyes that would eventually turn blue like Sarah's. The nurse placed her on Sarah's chest. Sarah looked down at her daughter and burst into tears. Hi, baby girl, she whispered. I'm your mama. We made it. We made it. Elena arrived an hour later. She brought flowers and teddy bears and cried when she held Grace. Ryan came next. Big, tough Marine reduced to mush by a tiny baby. Theodore came last. He stood in the doorway, hesitant. Can I come in? Sarah nodded. He approached slowly, looked down at the baby in Sarah's arms. She looks like your mother, he said quietly. Same eyes, same nose. Want to hold her? Theodore's hands trembled as he reached out. Sarah placed Grace carefully in his arms. He stared down at his granddaughter. Tears rolled down his face unchecked. Hello, Grace, he whispered. I'm your grandpa. I know I don't deserve you, but I promise I'll try to be worthy of you. Grace yawned and made a tiny sound. Theodore laughed through his tears. She's perfect, Sarah. Absolutely perfect. They stayed in the hospital for 2 days. Sarah learned how to nurse, change diapers, swaddle. Grace learned how to sleep, cry, and steal everyone's heart. On the second evening, Sarah's phone buzzed. A call from Rikers Island. Rebecca. Sarah stared at the phone. Her thumb hovered over the accept button. Grace stirred in her sleep beside Sarah's bed. Sarah looked at her daughter, then back at the phone. She made her choice. But we'll never know what it was. Spring came to New York with blooming trees and warming air. Sarah pushed a stroller through Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Grace was 6 months old now, getting bigger every day, starting to sit up on her own, babbling and smiling at everything. Sarah's small office above the bookstore was thriving. Not like before, but steady, sustainable. She had 12 clients now, enough to pay rent and bills and occasionally splurge on something nice for Grace. Her life looked nothing like it had a year ago, but it was hers, and it was real. Theodore had kept his promise. Every Thursday afternoon, without fail, he'd become a fixture in their lives. Grace lit up when she saw him. One Thursday, he arrived with a gift. "I know you said no help," he started. "What is it?" "Not money, I promise, just something I found." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a photo, black and white, faded. It showed Sarah's mother as a young woman, pregnant, smiling, standing in front of Columbia University. "Where did you find this?" Sarah's voice caught. "I kept it all these years. I know I had no right to, but I couldn't throw it away." Sarah studied the photo. Her mother looked so young, so hopeful, not knowing what was coming. "You look just like her," Theodore said, "especially when you smile." Sarah looked up at him. "Thank you for this and for showing up." "I'll always show up," Theodore said. "I've learned that lesson." That evening, Elena stopped by the office. She'd become more than Sarah's lawyer. She was a friend now. "I have news," Elena said. "The last of the civil suits settled. The hedge fund victims got their money back. James has nothing left." "Good. And Ryan and I have been talking. We want to officially bring you back as full partner in the business." Sarah looked surprised. "Really?" "Really, we've been coordinating with your 12 clients anyway. Might as well make it official." "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. We're better together." Sarah looked around her tiny office, at Grace sleeping in her portable crib, at the small but meaningful life she'd built. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." They celebrated with Thai takeout and sparkling cider. Ryan joined them. They talked about the future, about expanding the business, about new possibilities. After they left, Sarah sat at her desk with her laptop, Grace asleep beside her, the city glowing outside her window. She opened a blank document. She'd been thinking about this for months. Title, "What They Don't Tell You About Survival." She started typing. "Everyone thinks justice means winning in court. It doesn't. Justice means waking up the next day and choosing to keep living. It means learning that sometimes the family that betrays you teaches you more than the family that stays." She wrote about the trial, about Rebecca's betrayal, about Theodore's revelation, about rebuilding. She wrote for 2 hours. The words flowed easily, like releasing poison from a wound. Her phone rang. Rikers Island calling. Rebecca again. She'd been calling once a week for months. Sarah still hadn't answered. She looked at the phone, at Grace, at the words on her laptop screen. Her thumb hovered over the accept button. The phone rang again. Grace stirred, making soft baby sounds. Sarah looked at her daughter, at this tiny person who depended on her completely, who deserved a mother who was whole, not broken. She looked back at the phone, and she made her choice. But that choice is between Sarah and Rebecca. Not for us to know. What matters is what happened next. Grace took her first steps on her first birthday. December 25th, Sarah watched her daughter wobble across the living room floor, arms outstretched for balance. "She's walking!" Sarah grabbed her phone to record the moment. Theodore clapped from the couch. "That's my girl! Come to Grandpa!" Grace made it 3 steps before falling on her bottom. She looked surprised, then laughed. The apartment was bigger now, 2 bedrooms in Park Slope. Sarah could afford it after Carter, Mitchell, and Martinez marketing expanded. Elena had joined as an official partner. Turned out she was brilliant at business strategy. The birthday party was small, just Theodore, Elena, Ryan, and a few close friends. No big celebration, only people who mattered. While Grace destroyed her first birthday cake, getting frosting everywhere, the adults gathered in the living room. "Remember last year at this time?" Elena asked. Sarah laughed. "Don't remind me. I was in labor cursing everyone." "Best Christmas ever, though," Theodore said, his eyes on Grace. Ryan raised his champagne glass. "To survival, to rebuilding, to Grace." They clinked glasses together. Later that evening, after everyone left, Sarah gave Grace a bath. The baby giggled and splashed water everywhere. "You're trouble," Sarah told her. "You know that?" Grace babbled something that sounded like Mama. After putting Grace to bed, Sarah returned to her laptop. She had been working on a memoir for months, almost finished now. She read through the last chapter, about healing, about choosing to move forward despite everything. Her phone buzzed, text from Theodore. Thank you for letting me be part of her life. Best year of mine. Sarah smiled and texted back. You earned it. She opened her email, a message from a literary agent who had read 3 chapters of her manuscript. This is powerful. Let's talk about representation. Sarah's heart raced. Her story might actually help someone. That was all she wanted. She walked to Grace's nursery and stood watching her daughter sleep. Perfect tiny face, peaceful breathing. We made it, baby girl, Sarah whispered. She thought about James in prison, about Vanessa serving her time, about Rebecca. Rebecca had been released 3 months ago, 14 months with good behavior, exactly as Elena predicted. She had written Sarah a letter. Sarah read it once. It said the expected thing. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I destroyed the best thing in my life. Can you ever forgive me? Sarah hadn't responded. She put the letter in a drawer. Some wounds heal, some don't. Some you just learn to live with. The doorbell rang. 9:30 at night. Strange. Sarah checked the peephole. Her heart stopped. Rebecca stood in the hallway. Sarah opened the door slowly. They stared at each other. Rebecca looked different, thinner, short hair, no designer clothes, just jeans and a plain sweater. Hi, Rebecca said quietly. Hi. I know I shouldn't just show up, but you didn't answer my letters or calls. I know. Can we talk? Just 5 minutes? Sarah glanced back at Grace's nursery, then at Rebecca. 5 minutes. Out here, not inside. They sat on the hallway stairs like they did as kids. I'm in therapy, Rebecca said, 3 times a week, working on myself. Good. I got a job waitressing. It's humbling, but honest work. Sarah said nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Rebecca continued. I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know I understand what I did, the person I became. I'm ashamed of her. You should be, Rebecca nodded. I also wanted to ask about Grace. If maybe someday, when you're ready, I could meet her. As her aunt, I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Sarah looked at her sister, really looked, saw the regret, the genuine attempt at change. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. Maybe someday, but not now. I understand. They sat in silence. I should go, Rebecca said, standing. Rebecca walked to the elevator and pressed the button, then turned back. You look happy, she said. I'm glad. You deserve happiness. So do you, Sarah replied, but you have to earn it. I know, I'm trying. The elevator doors closed. Sarah sat on the stairs for a long time, processing, feeling. Then she went back inside, checked on Grace one more time, kissed her daughter's forehead. Sleep tight, baby girl, Mama's got you. And that was the truth that mattered most. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, this one from a publisher. We would love to discuss publishing your memoir. When can we meet? Sarah looked at the email, at Grace's closed door, at the life she had built from nothing. She typed back, I'm available next week. Then she closed her laptop and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to heal. But tonight she had her daughter sleeping safely, her business thriving, her father in her life. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 2 years later, Grace was 2.5 now, talking in complete sentences. Obsessed with Daniel Tiger and graham crackers, she had Sarah's blue eyes and Theodore's stubborn chin. Sarah's memoir had been published 6 months earlier. Shattered Silence, One Woman's Fight Against Narcissistic Abuse, spent 8 weeks on the bestseller list. She had done interviews, podcasts, speaking engagements. The story resonated with thousands of women who had experienced similar abuse. But the best part was the letters. Women writing to say thank you, that her story gave them courage to leave their abusers, to fight back, to survive. That made everything worth it. Carter, Mitchell, and Martinez Marketing had expanded to 20 employees, real office space in Brooklyn. Sarah had her own corner office with a bridge view. Theodore was fully retired. He spent 3 days a week with Grace. They had routines, park on Tuesdays, library on Thursdays, ice cream on Saturdays. He had become the father he never was, and the grandfather Grace deserved. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah took Grace to Prospect Park. Beautiful October day, leaves changing colors. Grace ran toward the playground. Sarah followed, watching her daughter climb with confidence. Sarah? She turned. A man stood nearby. Familiar, but she couldn't place him. It's Marcus. Marcus Reed. We went to college together. Sarah's eyes widened. Marcus, how are you? They hugged. He looked good. Older but good. Successful. Kind eyes. I read your book, Marcus said. I'm so sorry you went through that. Thank you. I'm okay now. Better than okay. I can see that. He watched Grace on the swings. Is that your daughter? Yeah, that's Grace. My whole world. She's beautiful. They talked for 20 minutes, catching up on 15 years. He was divorced, no kids, working in finance, living in Manhattan. Maybe we could get coffee sometime, Marcus asked. Catch up properly? Sarah hesitated. She hadn't dated since James, hadn't even thought about it. But looking at Marcus, she felt something. Not love, not yet, but possibility. Yeah, she said, I'd like that. They exchanged numbers. After he left, Grace ran to Sarah. Mama, who was that? An old friend, sweetie. Is he nice? Sarah smiled. I think so. That evening, Sarah and Grace had dinner with Theodore. Thai food. Grace ate chicken and rice with her hands. I ran into someone today, Sarah said. Marcus Reed, from college. Theodore looked up. The one who had a crush on you junior year? Did he? Sarah laughed. I never knew. It was obvious to everyone but you. Grace interrupted. Grandpa, read story. Theodore picked up the book Grace handed him. While he read, Sarah watched them. Her daughter, her father. This family built from broken pieces. Her phone buzzed. Text from Rebecca. Saw your book in the store. Front display. So proud of you. Sarah stared at the text. Rebecca had been respectful for 2 years, keeping distance, not pushing. They had talked a few times, brief conversations, testing waters. Last month, Sarah let Rebecca meet Grace, supervised, at the park, 30 minutes. It went okay. Grace was cautious but polite. Rebecca was gentle and careful. Sarah texted back, thank you. Bueno then added, Grace asks about her aunt sometimes, maybe the park again, next month. The response came immediately. I'd love that. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Sarah put her phone away. Forgiveness was complicated. Not a single moment, but a process, a choice made over and over. She wasn't there yet, maybe never fully, but she was trying. That night, her doorbell rang. After 10, late, Sarah checked the peephole. Marcus stood there holding flowers. She opened the door, surprised. Marcus, what are you doing here? I'm sorry to just show up, but I couldn't stop thinking about seeing you again. He held out the flowers. These are for you. Daisies, your favorite. How did you remember? You had them all over your dorm room sophomore year. Some things you don't forget. Sarah felt herself smile, really smile. Want to come in? I can make coffee. I'd love that. They talked until midnight. The conversation flowed easily like no time had passed. I followed your case, Marcus admitted. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't want to intrude. I appreciate that. What you went through, Sarah. I'm so sorry. You deserve better. I got better, eventually. Grace is better than anything I imagined. Marcus looked around, saw the photos on walls, Sarah and Grace, Theodore and Grace, family pictures. You built something beautiful here, he said. I did. From nothing. I'm proud of it. When Marcus left, he kissed Sarah's cheek gently. Can I see you again? A real date? Yes, Sarah said. I'd like that. After he left, Sarah stood in her living room, looking at her life, her daughter sleeping peacefully, her successful business, her published book, her healing family. It wasn't the life she planned, but it was the life she earned, and that made all the difference. 5 years later, Grace was 7 now, second grade, reading chapter books, playing soccer, growing into her own person. Sarah stood at the back of the school auditorium. Grace had the lead role in the spring play. She was nervous but excited. The lights dimmed. Grace walked onto the stage in costume. spoke her first line clearly and confidently. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, pride overwhelming her. Marcus stood beside Sarah, arm around her waist. They had been married for 3 years, quiet ceremony, small, just family and close friends. He had been patient, understanding, let Sarah heal at her own pace, never pushed, just supported. And slowly, Sarah learned to trust again, to love again, differently than before. Wiser, stronger. They had a son 18 months ago, Daniel. Grace adored being a big sister. Theodore sat in the front row with Daniel on his lap. The toddler was restless, but Theodore kept him entertained. Elena and Ryan sat behind them. Family tradition now. Rebecca sat in the back corner, alone. Sarah had invited her. After years of supervised visits and careful rebuilding, Rebecca was part of Grace's life now. Not like before, never like before, but present, trying. The relationship would always be complicated, always carry scars, but they found a way forward. After the play, they went for ice cream. Grace was high on adrenaline, talking nonstop. Mama, did you see when I remembered all my lines? You were perfect, sweetie. Grandpa, did you like it? Best play I've ever seen, Theodore said seriously. You're a star. Grace beamed. Later that evening, after Grace and Daniel were in bed, Sarah and Marcus sat on their porch. They had bought a house in Park Slope. Small, but perfect. You okay? Marcus asked. You've been quiet. Just thinking. About 5 years ago, the trial. Feels like a lifetime ago. Yeah, like it happened to someone else. In a way it did, Marcus said. You're not that person anymore. Sarah leaned against him. No, I'm not. Her phone buzzed. Email from her publisher. Shattered Silence was being adapted into a movie. Major studio, A-list actress attached. Sarah showed Marcus. That's amazing, he said. How do you feel? Good. Like maybe my story really matters. Maybe it'll help even more people. It already has. Sarah had received thousands of letters over the years. Women sharing their stories, thanking her for courage. She started a foundation to help abuse survivors with legal fees, named it after her mother, the Margaret Carson Foundation. The foundation had helped over 200 women, provided legal representation, therapy, financial assistance, turning pain into purpose, making suffering mean something. That night, Sarah opened her laptop. She had been working on her third book, fiction this time, a novel about resilience. She pulled up the final chapter, read it through, made small edits, then typed the last line. She looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully, at the life she'd built from ashes, and she understood that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about standing back up every single time. Sarah saved the file, closed her laptop. She walked to Grace's room, watched her daughter sleep. Perfect face, peaceful breathing. She thought about everything that brought her here. The betrayal, the pain, the fight, the victory, the healing. All of it necessary, all of it leading to this moment. She thought about James in prison, about Vanessa who served her time and disappeared, about Rebecca trying to be better, about Theodore who became the father he should have been. And she thought about the women who wrote to her, who found courage in her story, who escaped their own abusers because she showed them it was possible. Sarah kissed Grace's forehead gently. Sleep tight, my love. She went back to bed, climbed in beside Marcus. He stirred slightly, put his arm around her. Safe, loved, home. The last 5 years taught her something important, something she wanted other survivors to know. The slap that shattered her world also shattered her silence. The betrayal that destroyed her life gave her courage to rebuild it better. The lies that buried her became the truth that set her free. You don't just survive trauma, you transform it. You take what broke you and use it to build something stronger. That was her message. That was her truth. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. The story that began with violence ended with healing. The family that betrayed her was replaced by one she chose. The woman who was destroyed became the woman who rebuilt. And the daughter she fought so hard to protect was growing up knowing one truth. Her mother was a warrior. Not because she never fell, but because she always got back up. That was the legacy Sarah would leave, not just for Grace and Daniel, but for every woman who read her story and found courage to write their own ending. You can survive. You can rebuild. You can thrive. Sarah had proven it, and she would never let anyone forget it. The end was really just the beginning, and it was beautiful.